All right, so I have a minute past, and I think a few more folks will probably join us. But in the interests of time, why don't we get started on our presentation? Ms. Margaret Bruce, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. We anticipate more folks will join along the way. And for the folks who signed up and wanted to see, but for whatever reason are not able to join the webinar today, this will be recorded and will be posted in the next couple of days on the Local Government Sustainable Energy Coalition website. So you can return for your reference. The material here is available for you and your colleagues who may find value in this information. I'm the program manager for the Local Government Sustainable Energy Coalition. We are a coalition of local governments and nonprofit organizations and their business allies who represent the interests of local governments before California's energy-related regulatory agencies, representing the interests of local governments on topics like electricity rates, distributed energy generation policy, and climate change policies and initiatives. So it is my great pleasure to introduce also my colleague, Grace Kaufman. If Grace would say a few words. Grace is largely responsible for organizing this and other future webinars.
Thank you, Margaret. I'm happy to be here.
And it's great that we have our colleagues and partners, Terra Verde Energy. Terra Verde Energy is a business partner of the Local Government Coalition, and we're pleased and proud to have them present this information. We have joining us today Mr. David Burdick, who is the Asset Management Program Manager for Terra Verde, and both David Burdick and Rick Brown, the president of Terra Verde, are going to be jumping in on this presentation today. Their respective biographies are in the information that you received when you registered, so I'm not going to belabor the point, but both of them have years of expertise and great stories to share about asset management, renewable energy generation, storage, and the integration of all of those assets into the electricity grid and existing systems. So a quick housekeeping note for folks who are joining us. Everyone is in listen-only mode so that we can ensure the best sound quality possible. I want everyone to take a look at the dashboard on your right for the webinar participation. If you would like to pose a question at any time during the webinar, please post a question or send us a chat, and we will collect those questions and present them to David and Rick at the end. If there are really important things that you would like to share with us voice to voice, please note that in your chat, and we will open up the microphones for voice to voice chat at the end of the presentation. We certainly hope folks will send us comments, questions, and stories of the road, and that this will become an interactive dialogue where folks can take valuable information, not only from our presenters, but from each other's experiences. So with that, a little bit of context about this. Part of the genesis of this webinar was a conversation with David at a recent conference where we were talking about asset management and the importance of maintaining and stewarding the resources that people invest so much in. And I gave the analogy that it was a little bit like having a puppy. Everyone's excited about, oh my gosh, I have this new puppy and I'm so pleased and so proud of my new puppy. My new solar puppy is going to be so cute and so wonderful. But owners of puppies, like owners of solar systems and storage systems, don't often recognize the need for the care and feeding, the ongoing maintenance of those wonderful assets. So without further ado, I'd love to turn this over to David and to have him present how to take care of your solar puppy.
Excellent. Thank you, Margaret. And hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. A quick blurb about Terra Verde. We're an independent energy advisory firm that for the past 10 years has been working primarily in the public sector with cities and schools and counties, supporting their efforts around sustainability and reducing their energy use and energy costs. Our range of services includes feasibility analysis, project development, project management, and then, as we'll be discussing today, asset management services But over the past 10 years, we've developed 70 megawatts of solar, 13 megawatts of battery systems, and energy conservation measures in over 300 buildings. And recently, we've partnered with local CCAs as a program sponsored by the California Energy Commission and the National Renewable Energy Lab, developing software and program around incentivizing the implementation of distributed energy resources like solar and battery systems, but also EV chargers and others. So today we're going to be presenting to you the first in a two-part series around solar asset management. Today we'll be talking about best practices in managing these solar systems, but coming up here in just a few weeks, we'll be presenting part 2 of this series, where we'll be discussing how to assess and execute a power purchase agreement buyout. And so if your agency has a PPA or is looking at entering into a PPA agreement, this will be an important subject for you. For a lot of you out there, many of you have already invested in these projects under a power purchase agreement, and you're likely coming up on a window in your agreement for that buyout. And so hopefully that'll be a great resource to you guys. But today we're going to focus on the big question of how can we get the very best value out of these developed solar asset projects. And to highlight the importance of this, let me tell you guys a story. I was recently at the office of a city where the story was told that they had hired an intern to inventory their energy assets, and this intern had arrived at one site, and when they arrived at the site, they realized that one of the central inverters for this system was off, and that this outage, upon further investigation, hadn't just occurred recently. This wasn't an outage that was measured in hours, not even months, but in years. And come to find out that this intern had discovered that for 3 years, about a quarter of a megawatt was down for 3 years, which is thousands upon thousands of dollars loss for that agency. And while this is certainly a dramatic case, it is not an uncommon scenario where these kinds of outages go undetected or underperformance issues are undetected, and then they very quickly add up to significant losses and cost overruns. And so the big picture of why behind solar asset management is that in kind of the positive light is that when properly managed, these systems are going to perform better, they're going to last longer, yielding the maximum financial and energy use reduction benefits. But on the flip side of that, if they're not properly managed, these systems are going to develop increasing cost overruns, reduced performance, and then a lack of proper management will also decrease the longevity of these systems. So today we're going to look at how to do our due diligence as solar owners and how can we best manage these systems. And we're going to look at that under 4 major considerations. First, we're going to talk about performance monitoring. Second, preventive maintenance. Third, reactive maintenance. And then finally, reporting and forecasting. And as Margaret mentioned, as we go through the presentation, if you have questions, please do make use of the chat box. We'll be happy to take those questions at the end of the presentation. But let's start by looking at the question of performance monitoring. For most of those solar assets that have been distributed throughout California, there are some form of monitoring platform associated with those systems. And so the question is who's watching it, right? And so the best practice is that somebody at each of your agencies should be tasked with daily reviewing the performance of those solar systems to ensure that they're on and that they're performing as expected. And so that would look like, at a minimum, a daily check into that portal to review the prior day's performance, looking at 3 important targets. What was the actual performance of those systems versus what was the expected performance based on a typical weather year? And then if the information is available, what was the performance expected based on the actual weather pattern for that day? Here we're looking at an example of what a solar monitoring portal might look like. Here we're looking at about a half a megawatt system, 500 kW system that's we're observing 3 days of generation here. And I wanted to highlight what you might see or encounter if you were to look into the daily reporting features of a solar monitoring system. Here in day 1, we can see there are 3 lines. There is a blue line indicating the expected production for that size of a system given a typical weather year. The second line, the green line, is the weather adjusted. And so here, day 1, we can see there was a cloudy morning. And so that green line falls short of the blue early in the day, but catches up for the remainder of the day. And then that orange line is the actual performance of the system. And so there's clearly a performance drop here on day 1. In fact, if you look at day 1, 2, and 3, that orange line never arrives at the same peak as the green or the blue line, indicating that there is some kind of a chronic underperformance issue. In this case, because it's a model that I just built in a 5% soiling loss, but this type of consistent underperformance could be caused by some smaller outages, like a string level outage. Maybe a fuse has burnt out in one of the combiner boxes, or maybe if you have a system that's got multiple string inverters, maybe one of those inverters is out or is underperforming. But those types of small underperformance issues, if not detected early, can add up quickly to some significant cost overruns. But so day 1, you're looking at a little bit of soiling loss and a cloudy morning. Day 2, you'll notice that in the afternoon, there's a gap in that orange line. It's not a drop, it's a gap, and this is indicating what likely would be a communication interruption. And this is unfortunately a common scenario with solar assets. These communication systems are awfully sensitive and oftentimes can suffer interruptions, whether it's an internet service or the equipment went through a firmware update. But that's what we're looking at there. And then on day 3, we're looking at this orange line dropping off to 0 at the end of the day here. And this is a critical outage. This is a system-wide 0 performance event. And these are the types of things that have to be detected early. Otherwise, significant costs are going to pile up as that system is not operating. In addition to reviewing those daily performance reports, it's important to also be looking at open alerts. Again, depending on what monitoring system is installed with your solar system, typically a solar monitoring platform is going to provide not only performance analytics, but reporting on any kind of communication or performance issues, maybe at an inverter level, maybe at a system-wide level. And so reviewing those alerts, reviewing those daily performance reports allows you to stay in the know and to respond timely and appropriately to any needs for that system. Again, early detection is so key for these outages and these underperformances. And so, like the case of that city, imagine had somebody discovered this day 1, day 2, they would have avoided what probably totaled something to close to $250,000 in losses as a result of that outage. An important point to make related to performance monitoring is just that at least annually there should be a step taken to validate the accuracy of the metering and the monitoring hardware and software. In fact, Rick has an example from for years not had their metering equipment evaluated, and we were able to we were engaged actually as a third party to validate just that information. Rick, you want to share that story?
Yeah, and the problem, this is a water agency that had a large system that was under a performance guarantee, and the way in which the PPA provider had calculated the performance had in it assumptions around insolation or the amount of solar reaching that facility based on weather data. It turned out that the weather station that they had installed was improperly calibrated and was therefore overstating the performance of the system by several percent. But over a 3-year period, that overstatement had basically, or that over calibration had resulted in the client, the water agency, getting much less or significantly less savings than it had anticipated, about $60,000. And by us doing this calculation and showing that the weather station was off, we were able to recover through that performance guarantee that $60,000 for that agency.
Yeah, and so again, it's just important that in addition to daily reviewing these reporting features and a monitoring system that on a regular basis, the metering products themselves are being validated. The last note here is that it's important to establish accurate baselines. I mean, let's go back to this screen here. Imagine if all you're looking at is this orange line. You might see day 2, day 3 that there's issues, but you wouldn't see, unless you knew about this expected performance, whether or not the system was producing as much as expected, right? So it's important to, at the front end of these projects, or maybe if your system is several years old and you haven't established a baseline, is to set that baseline and get a bead on what should be the production in a typical year for this system, so that daily you can be reviewing whether or not we are achieving those targets. The second consideration here is around preventive maintenance. And unfortunately, there is a misnomer in the industry that solar is kind of a set it and forget it technology. And while certainly the maintenance needs of a solar asset when compared to other types of technologies is fairly minimal, the risks of loss related to negligence around those fairly simple maintenance activities is significant. And so let's talk about this preventive maintenance strategy. And in our minds, that means at least several things. One, creating for each system a facility operations plan. And by that, we mean a document that becomes the sole source of truth for that system. So putting together that plan would look like putting together a description of each system, including the specifics around the equipment and site plans. That'll be increasingly important if there is some kind of an outage or there's some kind of troubleshoot that's required. Having those plans, not just somewhere in the ether, but on hand, on file, will be so important in streamlining and expediting reactive maintenance needs. Also clarifying and updating on a regular basis contacts and roles and responsibilities for the agency itself, for the installer, if there's a PPA provider, who are the contacts there. And as many of you are aware, the average tenure for any employee in any role is about 5 years. And so over the life of a system, for all of the given stakeholders, you're going to see several different people filling these roles. And so it's important that on an annual basis, we're updating these records so that when an event occurs, we can quickly respond to those. Also with these as-built drawings and contacts, roles and responsibilities, to get a copy of the installer's operations and maintenance guide. That should provide you with a detailed reporting of what are the regular maintenance needs for your system in particular, as well as a monitoring system guide that should empower and direct your staff member who's going to be watching these systems each day. And then finally, having a clarified emergency shutdown and restart procedure and a contact list of those who would be employed in such an event. And then an important piece is the location of keys so that you can get access to those equipment. So again, having this kind of a document in place empowers your team to be able to respond appropriately and rapidly to the needs of your system. In addition to that facility plan, one of the keys to a preventive maintenance schedule is an annual inspection of these systems. And that inspection would include things like a visual inspection of the panels, the inverter, the racking, and the balance of system components like the panel boards, the AC disconnect, and the other electrical components. And a lot of times, a lot of losses and outages are prevented by simply taking a look at the system and looking, are there significant, soiling impacts from some of, not just the solar panels, but the electrical components themselves. We just did a site walk at a school district where kids had glued shut with super glue the electrical closet for one of the school district sites. And so they had to bring out a drill to open up that, closet for us. I mean, so, just sometimes taking a look, shaking a door handle can save you time in the event of an emergency. In addition to that visual inspection, that annual maintenance visit should include voltage and IV curve tracing, again, by a qualified electrician, making sure that you're able to, detect as early as possible any unexpected degradation or irregularities in the electrical circuit. Also, to validate the continuity of your electrical circuits and your torque marks for all of your wire connections. Oftentimes, the the big explosive moments on a solar site will happen when, over years of heating and cooling, wires start to pull away from their terminal blocks from where they were connected inside of different components, and if they pull away far enough, they'll arc, creating, an event. So checking those connection points on a regular basis prevents those types of events. And then lastly, as we've already described, validating the accuracy of all the metering and the weather sensor components on your system. And
before you go on, the point that Dave is making here, this is a good practice from just a asset management standpoint, but one of the things you're buying when you buy a system are warranties, and those warranties are on the panels, on the inverter, which he's going to talk about a little bit more. But there's also generally, if the project has been scoped properly and spec'd properly, basically a workmanship warranty. And some of these things that Dave was talking about is, by doing that annual inspection, you're making sure that if there has been an issue, that you can enforce those warranties.
That's right.
And if you haven't done those inspections, it's a lot harder to justify, if a problem occurs, that the vendor, the contractor who built the system, is responsible for whatever it may cost to fix some kind of problem. So it is critical to do that annual maintenance in order to maintain that workmanship warranty. But Dave is going to talk about the other warranties here also.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Rick. One of the points I wanted to make here is that specifically with the inverter, which is one of the higher dollar components on a solar system, the regular inverter maintenance is typically a requirement from the manufacturer as a warranty condition. And I wanted to highlight this to drive the importance of these annual activities. Here we're looking at a screenshot from an actual warranty from a manufacturer of an inverter. And you'll notice that under the conditions for this warranty, that item J there, that a failure to perform preventive maintenance may in fact void that warranty. And so you can bet your bottom dollar that a manufacturer, when engaged around a warranty claim, their first question is going to be around, what exactly have your maintenance practices been? And they'll certainly be looking to exploit that to negate their liability in such an event, right? So,
are you going to talk about why that's important, even when it's a PPA arrangement where the third party has that?
Yeah, so it's important that even if you're not the direct owner of the system, if you're a PPA client, that you're holding your PPA provider to account around these issues. Unfortunately, there is this unexamined assumption in the marketplace that if I've engaged a PPA provider for my solar system, that I don't need to care about it, right? They're financially incentivized to see that system performs optimally. One of the benefits to a PPA is that you don't carry the risk of ownership, right? Well, that's not exactly true. We do find that there's oftentimes a reluctance on the part of PPA providers to continue the cash investment for the maintenance needs of these systems. And if they, in fact, void that warranty, you, in the process of buying out that system, may end up absorbing the risks associated with their underperformance. And so whether or not you own your system, you or your PPA provider should be annually inspecting and performing these maintenance activities. And just to show you again, here's a copy from that same manufacturer of an inverter of what exactly are their guidelines for annual preventive maintenance. And it's not a very time-consuming endeavor, so this is not a costly effort, but it certainly will be costly if it's not performed, right? But here it's just checking the electrical connections, cleaning out air vent filters, and replacing cooling fans as necessary. And so again, they're not high demand maintenance needs, but they are certainly very expensive risks if not performed regularly. So let's talk about the corrective maintenance. This is addressing when something is impacting the performance, whether something's gone terribly wrong or something as subtle as just soiling, right? Here in lovely California, we do have a thriving ag community, and throughout most of the state, we have heavy soiling. And this is true not only in the Central Valley, but also in Southern California and Northern California. And so soiling is one of those questions that all solar owners have to be paying attention to. And the question that we get asked regularly is, how often should these systems be washed? And this is it's a return on investment question, right? So if in the course of a year, soiling begins to impact my performance of my solar system to a certain degree, that loss represents a certain amount of increased energy costs to my agency. And so to know, okay, how much does a 5% or a 10% soiling loss impact the cost savings from that system? And then you measure that up with the cost to engage someone to wash these systems. And a note on that is that it's important, if you are engaging with someone to wash your system, that they have the right methods that they're going to employ to wash these systems. You can't just hit these things with a pressure washer or with a hose. In fact, I just recently saw a report from a utility here in California that actually, in fact, did encourage its members to just simply spray solar panels with a garden hose. The problem with that, of course, is that over years, the sediment in that water will build up and then affect the performance of those solar panels. And so typical best practices around cleaning a solar panel is using some type of reverse osmosis or deionization chamber to pull out the sediment in the water, so that when these panels are being cleaned, you're not using detergents or you're not calcifying the solar panels, but clear, clean water is what's being engaged. And then second, don't use any kind of pressure system. And so these are, again, very basic practices that should become the standard for the type of practices that either you would employ as an agency or that you would expect from a contractor who's washing your systems. In addition to addressing soiling needs, corrective maintenance would also apply to outages and underperformance issues like we've been alluding to here. And again, the challenge with this is going to be around A, detecting the outage, B, then troubleshooting it, and then C, making sure that you're clarifying who's financially responsible for engaging around that corrective maintenance. As Rick alluded to earlier, the typical requirement for most solar finance programs is that manufacturers and installers provide at least a 10-year warranty around their equipment. Most inverter manufacturers, their warranties are typically somewhere in the 10 to 15 range, and you or your PPA provider might have bought up an extended warranty of maybe 20 to 25 years. But typically, inverter maintenance should be covered by at the cost of your either your installer or the manufacturer or the PPA provider. And the same goes with your solar panels. Again, most corrective maintenance needs should not be the cost of your agency. And so having that facility operations plan in place to have clear roles and responsibilities, and then having somebody monitoring that system daily is what empowers you to, in this moment right here, when there's an outage, respond appropriately and quickly to this system. Lastly, let's talk about the reporting and the forecasting practices around asset management. It is important that in addition to a staff member daily monitoring these systems, that the right team of folks are on a regular basis, whether that's monthly or, as we would recommend, quarterly, reviewing the performance of these systems and, equally important, the energy use at those same facilities. On a quarterly basis, any team that has invested time and money into these systems should be reviewing information like what's represented here in this report. This is an example report of what we provide to our client base and that they use as the basis of their regular conversations as they're participating in monitoring their systems. Here in this quarterly memo, the first piece is this executive summary where we high level the performance of their solar systems. Here, this is a client that has a whole fleet of systems, and this page one is an added sum up of all of those systems performing over the course of a year. And we've got those three benchmarks here again: the typical year expectations, the weather adjusted, and then actual. And so reviewing that information on a quarterly basis will be important. Also looking at usage. And so here in the bottom of that page, we have a similar chart that details baseline usage from the previous 12 months. and then what the actual usage was. And so you can see here in July for this client, their July usage was significantly higher than the previous year, but then in August, significantly lower. And this is one of the challenges that is presented by solar owners, is at the end of a year, you might look at your utility bills and say, well, how did we do? And it's hard to know just from the dollar amount spent on utility energy, whether or not you did achieve your target savings, because your energy uses impacts that number. And so how much did our change in operations impact our cost savings that we were expecting to realize from our solar investment? Having this type of data that you're able to review on a regular basis is key to making that assessment. In addition to, on a quarterly basis, reviewing the PV performance and the energy use, looking at those corrective maintenance activities. And so here you're looking at a log of maintenance activities for this client that includes a list of all of the items that occurred over the course of that quarter, when that issue occurred, how quickly it was resolved, how many days did that take, what type of outage was it? Was it a communication issue? Was it an actual performance issue? And then a detailed assessment of what exactly took place and whether or not it was corrected. And so by looking at these types of summary analytics and then site-specific analytics, your team goes from out of the dark and into the light. Recently, I was talking with an agency that they had engaged with a PPA provider for a system that they were expecting to realize $60,000 in annual energy cost savings. And it turns out they're only seeing about $42,000 to $45,000 in energy cost savings, which, you know, for them is happy, right? They're saving money, but they're saving only 75% of what they were expecting to achieve. And when I said, okay, so tell me about that, he says, well, you know, it's hard to know. You know, we've had changes in our operations. The weather's been impacted the system. You know, how could we clearly understand these types of things? Well, by looking at these types of analytics on a regular basis, you're no longer leaving a, you know, 25% underperformance assumption kind of out there in the ether to this dark cloud of uncertainty. Now you're seeing things in the light and are able to manage the energy performance of your investment. In addition to these monthly or quarterly reviews, on an annual basis, it's important to look at your system from a financial perspective and to get down to the nitty-gritty of how did this system perform from a cost savings perspective. And so the types of data that you'd want to be looking at are things like actual avoided cost of electricity. And so looking at what would our electricity costs have been had we not been operating our solar assets. Also looking at what other type of revenue streams were associated with that system, whether there's rebates or renewable energy credit sales that you're receiving as a part of that investment. Looking at your operational and your finance costs to get a true sense of your savings realized over the course of that year. And then also on that annual basis, we include similar summaries for our clients. You may want to also look at the roll-up of, okay, how did these systems perform in summary? Looking at those preventive maintenance activities, looking at the reports from your staff or from the contractor you've engaged to perform those annual inspections and those annual maintenance activities. Looking at where are we at, how are these systems aging, are there any trends that we're seeing that we need to respond to? And then lastly, looking at how did this system perform relative to the project expectations on the front end, right? Every single one of your solar assets has a similar pro forma attached to them, and there were expectations for a length of 25 to 30 years as to how this system would perform financially, and to be able to know, are you on track or not? Lastly, as a part of these regular conversations around the performance of these investments, important considerations to have on the table is whether or not it's time to buy out your PPA provider. Again, coming up in August, we'll be hosting a webinar to address the types of questions and challenges that you're going to face in those types of assessments and transactions. But also looking at, is it time to replace those inverters? Again, typical inverter life is somewhere going to be in, I should say optimal operating life is going to be between 10 and 15 years. And so in a typical solar system, there's going to be a round of inverter replacements that's going to take place. And so you may be approaching that time period. And so something to be considering. And then looking at those energy use profiles, and if, let's say, your energy use is beginning to outstrip the savings performance capacity of your current systems, maybe it's time to look at additional energy resources like a solar system or a battery system.
Yeah, just talk specifically around batteries. You know, as some of you may have noticed in looking at your bills over the last 3 to 4 years, the rate at which your demand charges are going up, if you're not on a no demand charge rate structure, is almost double the rate at which the cost of your energy is going up. And under that circumstance, if your particular demand profile is such that your solar is not able to offset some of your demand charge increases, it is time, in part of that forward looking, it may be time to look at adding battery storage to your system if you don't have it there already, obviously. We've got, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 or 4 clients over the next 6 to 12 months who've had solar facilities in place for anywhere from 5 to 10 years who are now going to be adding battery storage. There is some complexity there from an electrical standpoint, but it's all solvable. But you know, getting an analysis done to see whether or not batteries do make sense as an additional way to reduce those demand charges is a good idea. And as policies begin to emerge that, you know, are aimed at allowing for the discharge of batteries during what's going to be the new peak period in the evenings, it is also another way to increase the value of your solar facility, because if you can charge those batteries in the afternoon when the sun is up, and then discharge those batteries not just to shave off your demand charges, but to also offset whatever load you may have during the new peak periods in the evening, the economics can look really good there. So it is a specific area to look at, and maybe one of the webinars we'll do in the future is around batteries and all the different ways you might be able to make that, the economics of that work.
It's an excellent point. And so, let's see here.
Are we frozen? Having technical difficulties. For some reason, our screen is frozen.
Yeah, the PowerPoint's frozen. We're pretty much concluded with the presentation, though. I did want to mention a few things in summary, and then we can go to Q&A. So again, the key here is, you know, do you have somebody who is daily looking at your system? That's super important. The second piece is, do you have an identified plan around your preventive maintenance needs? Super important. And then lastly, do you have a regular meeting where you and the right people at your team are reviewing the performance of these systems? And if you're following through on those 3 activities, daily monitoring, having the right plan in place, and looking at this system with the right people on a regular basis, you're going to see significant increases in the performance and then the cost benefit and the energy reduction benefits of your solar systems. I'll highlight one other item, and then we'll go to Q&A, and that is on our website at terraverde.energy. If you look at our blog, we recently put out a post that highlights the top 5 ways that solar owners lose money, and it tells the stories of some of the pain points that these types of asset management strategies solve for. And so you might find that of interest. And if you're interested in getting a copy of that blog or of this presentation, I'm sure that Margaret, you can email Margaret, or you can get me at david@terraverde.energy. I'd be happy to send a copy of all this information as well.
Great, thank you, David, and thank you, Rick. I don't see any questions or comments on the dashboard for the webinar, so I'm hoping that folks won't be shy and that they will send us their questions and comments and input. I have a couple of questions. Just hearing your presentation and thinking about all of the ways that a system's performance can be degraded, it's a little bit like, you know, that slow dripping erosion of a system's productivity or viability. When people understand how much maintenance they've missed or how much system management they might have lapsed in, what kind of value are you seeing your clients having typically left on the table without quite realizing how much of an opportunity or how much value they've missed? Maybe by percentage performance would be a good indicator.
Yeah, so to put some numbers around the costs of underperformance. So let's say you have a 200 kilowatt system. It's a fairly small system. It's probably the average size of most of the carport shade structures in California. For every week that that system is out and undetected, or is for every week, maybe your team has detected that outage, but is because of the lack of a clear plan or documentation around who's responsible to respond to these types of needs. If it takes you an extra week or 2 or 3, for every week that that system is out, will cost the average agency about $6,000. And so that cost begins to add up significantly over a fleet of systems, right? Unfortunately, there are these types of underperformance and outage issues on a regular basis. I'd say most systems are going to see some type of performance impacting event 3 times a year. That may not be a system-wide outage, but it may be a fuse is blown in one of the combiner boxes. It might be that an inverter, these inverters can pick up AM radio frequencies and trip off thinking that there's an arc fault on the system. I mean, it's wild, the range of types of challenges that are presented there. But if a system has been neglected, if there's not been clear practices around asset management, the costs around this can add up to hundreds of thousands of dollars easily over the course of 2 or 3 years.
And one important consideration there, Margaret, is that it's when does that outage happen?
Right.
If that outage happens in the middle of winter when your rates are relatively low, the cost savings loss is going to be less than if it's in the middle of the summer and when your usage is very high and rates are the highest. Right. Then that cost could be even greater. So, absolutely, starting somewhere around April or May is when you absolutely want to make sure you're on top of, a quick response on those kinds of things.
That's right.
Great information, guys. I know a lot of organizations, schools, districts, local governments often run with kind of a lean staff. And the staff that are in charge of these things may wear multiple hats. What kind of skills, what kind of knowledge is really helpful or necessary for in-house staff to perform these kinds of maintenance and oversight and data checking tasks? Because if you had a short resume of the kinds of skills and experience that somebody would need to be effective doing this might be helpful to either include in someone's job description or to have a checklist for someone that was maybe more than just Tuesday solar.
Sure. Well, as you can see from the range of activities, it really takes a team, right? So on the active monitoring piece, if you've got somebody who's able to who has any kind of engineering background, if you have maybe a project manager who's got an electrical engineering background, they might be the right qualified candidate to do some of those monitoring activities, because whoever's monitoring these systems will likely also be the one who's engaging with the manufacturer, the installer around the corrective maintenance needs. And it's nice to have somebody in that seat who can't have the wool simply pulled over their eyes when the excuses come out around why it isn't their responsibility. But you're also going to need, if you're going to have some of your staff performing some of these maintenance activities in-house, having your electrical staff trained and certified around the right protective measures, specifically for engaging with medium voltage equipment. Also engaging your manufacturer around possibly training them for those activities is an option. And then lastly, the other key piece is the financial side, right? Your project engineer, your electrician are not going to be the ones who can perform the type of financial analysis that informs the forward-looking trends. So it's really a team of at least 3 people, an engineer, project manager, a electrician, and a financial advisor or financial director.
And, for most cities or other municipalities, you don't necessarily need to have a full-time person in each of those roles, but you do have to have that accountability. Yeah. And again, the other alternative is if you decide, I don't want to really burden my staff with these activities, then you can have somebody who is, a general, either a public works type person, somebody who deals with contract engineering type services, and then you bring on a third party to perform these activities. And often it's more cost effective just because of the fact that doing some of the preventive and corrective maintenance activity, there are definitely economies of scale. So a third party provider that contracts with different clients to perform those O&M activities is going to get a much better price on the preventive maintenance, the corrective maintenance, than a single entity that's going out there into the market on their own. So if you do decide to do it with a combination of somebody internal and external, that internal person should be somebody who has general contract management type skills and expertise.
That's great. In fact, Margaret, let me just jump in real quick to say we were engaged by a city to perform asset management services as a third party, and part of our scope initially was to essentially train them to hand this off to them. And here, after several years of watching our activities and seeing what would be required, they've since decided, you know what, we're just going to keep engaging you for these services. And so again, that may be an approach, is to engage the party initially to get a sense for what would be required, and then to either, as the years evolve, divide that scope up to some of the things that you're going to manage yourself, and then what parts you're going to.
I think your sound cut out there just a little bit, but let me step in and say just thank you for that. And I'm hoping that your sound is back again soon, because we have a couple of questions, and they're kind of housekeeping questions. We have a person who has asked if there is a chance to use or for us to send out your PowerPoint, and the question about, is this going to be recorded and available? So the recording is going to be condensed and then posted on the LGSEC website at www.lgsec.org under the events tab. So when it's completed and condensed, we will do that. We have Grace has just sent me a message saying that it seems that our friends at Terra Verde have somehow been disconnected. So let me quickly answer those two questions. The PowerPoint will be available both in the recorded form and as a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation in PDF on the LGSEC website. So,
Margaret, can you hear us?
Now you're back. Wonderful.
Yep. Excellent.
Okay, so I was just jumping ahead and answering two of the questions that have been posted that are kind of housekeeping protocol questions about the availability of the recording and the availability of your PowerPoint. And I hasten to say that the recording will be posted on the LGSEC website again, and the PowerPoint in PDF will be as well. That's acceptable to you.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so I had one other technical question, and that is, when you think about you said sort of the considerations of the local governments, districts, and school districts as they choose to employ a third party or not, I'm sure some of them are going to take a look at this in terms of, well, how much time should I be spending on system management and asset management? So do you have kind of a thumbnail sketch? So if you are a school district, say, and you've got a per campus, you've got a solar system on your carport, how much time is typically involved in the oversight, maintenance, and management of that system?
That's an excellent question. In fact, I've recently put together a tool that, based on the number of systems that's owned in a fleet for an agency or for a district, and then based on the average labor cost for the staff members that are employed, what should be the typical time and therefore cost investment look like on an annual basis for a district. And so let's take a portfolio of, let's call it 2 megawatts of solar across 10 different systems, which is probably most of our school districts in California. They've got several sites. Cities may have maybe fewer by number, but larger solar systems, maybe as they're deployed across larger operational facilities. But for this given site, you're looking at a time investment that adds up to something close to $120,000 annually across the monitoring and the reporting and the reactive and the preventive maintenance needs for that system. And so let me try to get you a dollar amount or how many hours is represented there. So yeah, it's certainly going to be a number that's quantified in hundreds of hours over the course of a year.
Great.
And that breaks down into different pieces, right? So you may have somebody monitoring the system for maybe a half hour to an hour a day, but when it gets down to the preventive maintenance and corrective maintenance activities, now you're talking about, multiple days of multiple people. When you're talking about, doing the reporting work and doing the analysis associated with that reporting work, again, a number of days, a number of hours, but it really does vary. Rules of thumb are a little tough because system size and system complexity are different. So a water agency that may have a 5 megawatt system connected to 1 meter, even though it's a large system, it's the work that is getting done, the monitoring and so forth is less complex than this case example that David gave of 10 sites with 2 megawatts. So it isn't a one size fits all is the problem. But
that's right. And it where the time investment really starts to add up is around the case management, as there are, let's say you have 6 systems, a smaller portfolio of systems, and that for each of those systems they're going to have those 2 to 3 events per year. Well, those events per systems add up, right? So you've got somewhere between 12 and 18 events that are going to be managed, and some of those events are non-consequential. It's right. They invest an hour of their life figuring out, is there some kind of an issue? Maybe they make a phone call and it's done. Some of those events may be far more time engaging, right? So I'm engaging our installer. We're contacting them to schedule an appointment. We're facilitating their visit. We're reviewing their troubleshoot. So you can see where the time investment starts to add up pretty quick.
Great. So I think we are drawing to a close of our time, and before we lose our audience, and while I still have folks on board, I want to thank everyone again for their attendance and participation, and thanks to our speakers for their very, very useful and practical information. I wanted to wrap up with a quick shout out to the Local Government Commission is hosting the Climate Adaptation Forum, and for folks who are not familiar with this program happens every other year. This year on August 28th and 29th, it will be hosted in Sacramento. This 2-day Climate Adaptation Forum will probably also touch on issues around energy resilience and adaptation with respect to energy issues. So for those of you who are seeing the overlap between energy reliability, energy resilience, and climate change adaptation, this may be a very interesting forum for you or conference. For those of you who are Local Government Sustainable Energy Coalition members, you do have a discount, so I would encourage you to sign up for this outstanding conference. Also, the Local Government Sustainable Energy Coalition is hosting its fall forum in Santa Rosa this year. It will be on October 25th and 26th. The 25th will be a full-day event. The morning of the 26th, we are planning a tour, one or more tours of energy resilience examples. The topic of the fall forum is disasters and energy resilience, keeping the lights on in our darkest hour. And we're going to be exploring the relationship between the investor-owned utilities and local governments, districts, and other local functions with regard to emergency preparedness and disaster response. And we hope you will join us. If you are not already members of the Local Government Sustainable Energy Coalition, we would encourage you to join. You can check out member benefits at our website, again at www.lgsec.org, or by contacting myself, Margaret Bruce, at mbruce@lgc.org, or Grace Kaufman at lgc.org. And I encourage you all to participate in the upcoming next in the series webinar on asset management, and this next one on power purchase agreements. And with that, unless I see any other comments, my part is done, and I would leave the last words to our guests.
Well, thank you, everybody. We appreciate your time, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. My email address will be at the end of the presentation. It's david@terraverde.energy. And so look forward to continuing the conversation. Thanks, guys.
All right, thank you, everyone, and thank you for joining us, and come back again for the second in the series. We are concluding this presentation.
Thanks, Mark.